Okay, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
We thank you for coming today. It's always such a celebratory times, and we have next student to defend dissertation, and Vigny definitely not just a next student. He's one of our pride and glory. It's his work, what he's doing in Burundi. How we will work today. We will give opportunity for Vigny to speak for 40 minutes about his dissertation. Then the committee members will be asking questions. Then we'll give opportunity for audience to ask questions or give comments if they want. And after that, committee will meet to discuss the results of defense and make a decision. So before we start, I would love to know who is here in a group, not maybe everyone familiar with each other. So my name is Karina Korostelina. I am the chair of the committee and I'm professor here at SCAR.
I'm Susan Allen and also faculty here at SCAR.
I'm Fuertes, an alumnus of SCAR and also adjunct faculty here, but I'm with the School of Integrative Studies.
I'm Kevin Affleck, I'm with the school here.
I'm Sarah Cobb and I'm faculty here.
I'm Stella Bizimana and I'm from Burundi and I'm a friend of Vigny.
I'm Leila and was a student and I'm a friend of Vigny.
I'm Jay, I'm on the staff of SCAR and I'm also a friend of Vigny.
I'm Karina, I'm from Burundi and I'm Vigny's friend.
I'm Vivi, I'm come from Burundi, I'm Vigny's friend.
Okay, and the little one?
Oh, she's Sabra, she's my daughter.
Okay, wonderful. So let's start, Vigny. So you have 4 open and you have 40 minutes to tell us about your work.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I would like to express my gratitude to the committee members who gave their time to help me with this work. It was very difficult for me to do the field work, to do the research, and to do all the kind of work which was needed to have this final product. I would also want to have this opportunity to thank the School for Conflict Analysis and Resolution, especially the Dean, who is here today, for the support that the school granted me during my PhD program. Finally, I would like to thank my family members, my family friends, my classmates, and all the faculty here and within the university. Without taking too much, I would like to go straight to the point. My topic is ethnic identity shift in Burundi. Why did I select this topic? I chose this topic because the history of Burundi is made of conflict, especially ethnic conflict. And whenever you hear on the news, you read about Burundi, you may not know where it is located, but you may know that it is a Hutu, Tutsi, Twa land. And this is problematic because whatever happens, people jump straight to the ethnic divisions, either predicting what is going to happen or to explain what is taking place in terms of ethnic lines. It's also interesting to see how people know about Rwanda and about other similar countries, but they know absolutely nothing about Burundi. If you go on Google to Google about research that has been done in Burundi, you will not find many. But the history is there. Of course, it's an oral country. People can talk about the history. It is a chance to talk about that forgotten country. Also, I am still convinced that there is a way we can shape, we can act to positively change people's minds, people's attitude, and people's behavior. And this is what I'm attempting to do through this research. To do this, I use this research question. How do people change their ethnic identity, and how does that shift impact the perception of one another? I talk about ethnic identity shifts, but as everything means interactions, I want to know exactly if there is any way people can change the way they perceive one another. Instead of seeing some as good, while we consider ourselves as good and others bad, is there any way you can perceive in a positive way other people, especially those who have different ethnic background? I also select this case study of Burundi because it has gone through different times, different situations. The picture I selected here is a picture of a seminary of Buta. And those are 40 people, 40 students, seminarists, who were killed when the war was ending. They were killed because they refused to be divided. Meaning, this has a meaning for me because people have started to show us some sign of ethnic identity shift, even if we're not aware of it. People refuse to be separated so that they can be killed. At that time, when 40 seminarists were killed, the current leading political party, CNDD-FDD, was still called a rebel group. And they invaded the seminary, and they asked Hutu to go on the side and the Tutsi to go on the side so that they could kill Tutsi. And people decided not to be divided. And they shoot on them, and the 40 people died. And I took that opportunity to take some members of Burundi Peace Building and Nonviolence Network to go there and reflect and think about what we can learn from those brave people. Several times were marked by wars. I'm not talking about all the wars that took place in Burundi. I'm just taking some examples of the ones which are well known. The first one is in 1972, called Genocide Against the Hutu. The second one is Dontega Marangara killings. Actually, Dontega is one of the communes of Kirundo in the north, and Marangara is one of the communes also in the north, but from Ngozi province. At the time, it was said that there was a kind of uprising of Hutu who wanted to overturn the government, and then there was a response from the government, and especially the army, which was almost made by Tutsi, to kill every Hutu who was in that region. In 1993, there was another series of war, which is known by everybody. The then President Ndadaye was assassinated by the Tutsi-dominated army, and all his close collaborators were also killed in the same night of 21st of October 1993. And the unexpected happened. Hutu, even if they were not in the army, they did not have guns, they stood up and started killing Tutsi. They were killing those who were living with them, those who were neighbors, who did not have anything to do with the killings of those leaders. And then at the time, we could see how ethnic divisions were very clear. Hutu killing Tutsi, and on the other way, Tutsi killing Hutu. It was obvious. But with this shift happening, we see a different trend in 2015 with the controversial presidential term. Yes, there was a problem, and people were kind of fighting. The population of some headquarters were fighting the police and the army. But what we see is that there is no longer any ethnic boundaries that defines who's fighting who and who's killing who. And this was very interesting because it happens when I was doing the research. Also, I couldn't talk about Burundi without talking the peace agreement that was signed in 2000 between G10 and G7. What is G10 and what is G7? By the time we had only ethnic divisions. Even political parties were made based on ethnic lines. G7 means all the political parties which are affiliated to Tutsi. And G7 means all political parties which are affiliated to Hutu. Meaning, all the Arusha Accord was trying to bring together Hutu and Tutsi. G7 and G10. The Arusha Accord has 5 chapters. The first one is the nature of Burundian conflict and the problem of genocide exclusion, as well as the solution. The second is about democracy and good governance. The third is peace and security for all. Fourth, reconstruction and development. And fifth, the guarantee for implementation of the agreement. This is a foundation of everything in Burundi, because all the ethnic quota which will be discussed in this thesis are generated by this accord. All this mixture of all political parties to be involved in the government, it is reflected by this accord. And even the constitutions, the now constitution is also relying on that accord. And how am I going to discuss all those issues? I have 7 chapters in my dissertation. The first one is about the theoretical foundation. The second, of course, the first one is about ethnic identity and ethnic identity shift in Burundi. But the second one deals with the case study of Burundi. What is Burundi? Who are those people living in Burundi? What are their origins? What differences do they show? What are the main criteria which shows if there is any difference or not? And how have they been changing? The third is about my own reflection on my experience. Because I am Burundian, I grew up in Burundi, but also I had an opportunity to experience most of the wars, but also to be engaged in peace-building activities since I was studying in Burundi up to now. And reflecting on all that experience, I draw some kind of recommendations. The fourth is about the research methodology, and then data analysis. 6, it will be the discussion of this new concept of ethnic identity shift. Finally, I will share some recommendations. The literature review that I will be discussing will be mainly about ethnic identity and ethnic identity shift, but also identity in general. First of all, identity is nothing else than interactions, how intergroup conflict develop, because as Howitz and Tajfel and Turner and others discussed, when people start to see differences between groups, then a conflict can rise because each one will be protecting his own group. Also, identity is a product of interaction and a negotiation. Finally, there is a possibility of manipulating ethnic identity, positively or negatively, as we will see. In terms of social identity, we took that definition, which is the feeling of belonging to a social group as a strong connection with social category and an important part of our mind that affect our social perception and our behavior. I'm coming back to this definition because it shows exactly the role that it can play on perception and the behavior of people. And those are some of the main findings from both the survey and the interviews. Also, talking about social identity, we have to keep in mind the we-they difference. How we perceive ourselves and how we perceive others, and how we can be made to understand what others are. Of course, we'll be discussing about exclusion and inclusion, but also access to resources, as it will appear in our findings. Ethnic identity is nothing else than what is shown there as origin. Greek origin of ethnic, which means company or people or tribe. This makes sense with this research because who do we consider as our company? Who do we consider or our people or our tribe? Also impact how we interact with them or how we perceive them. But also identity, which is the same. In the context of Burundi, the same has a more profound meaning because as we will see in our interviews, many people really continue to argue that they are the same. Ethnic identity then means sameness of objects and consistency or even continuity over time, which defines the basis of establishing and grasping the definiteness and the distinctiveness of something. Many people have been discussing ethnic identity, and they have different factors that they consider. In this research, I only brought all those kind of factors that they bring just to put there. It's either origin, descent, kinship, color, language, common tradition, or religion. I'm taking seriously the constructivist approach because that's the approach that shows how the activities that we have been doing can help construct a new identity. Because if we consider identity as something which is fixed, then all the activities, all the initiatives that we start doing in Burundi would have no effect. Also, it helps us, the constructivist approach helps us understand that ethnic identity can be the outcome of a well-structured or conceived strategy. There are a set of activities that we can do in a particular context that can lead to the development of a particular identity. There are major theories that we have discussed in this chapter, which are the frustration aggression. Yes, Burundians were aggressive in many of the times of the history, but the explanation in some ways may be the frustration that they have been going through. Who has access to what? Who has access to education? Who has access to the military? Who has access to all resources, either economic, social, or political? The second is the relative deprivation. When do people accept that what other people are getting is fair or not? The chosen trauma. The activities that we see in Burundi, the behavior that we see in Burundi cannot be taken as granted. After a series of violent actions, after a series of mass killings, after the 1972 killings, the 1993 killings, people are traumatized, and the activities that they do are in some ways influenced by those trauma. And if we need to deal with this trauma, then some activities can be conducted. Also, some glories, maybe. And we saw it, there are people who are benefiting from some violent act or some kind of leadership who would like to see the status quo. And with those glories, they think if we continue acting this way, therefore we can maintain ourselves on power, for example, but also the threat. Who's afraid of what? What would happen, for example, if somebody is taken to court because of crime he committed? All these also can enter into action if we are discussing about ethnic identity shift. Research methodology. In this research, I prefer to use action research, participatory action research. Why? Because it's a collective or collaborative or a way of critically understanding the practice that can be efficient. I tried to work with a particular group of people in Burundi on a daily basis to see what kind of activities they like or they would like to see implemented in the region and in their living like the community. And then I worked with them a daily basis so that we can see, is there any change that we can see in our community, in the way of interaction, in the way of perception. But it's also a way of having concrete social practices and actual interaction, as Dofina said. In the activities that I will be describing, we knew exactly what was going to happen, what was going to take place, who was going to be involved, and what role he was going to play. And by going through the same practices, we were able to see some kind of changes. But also, we wanted to address the questions or the problem that communities themselves are experiencing. That's why we decided not to do the activities by our own, but to work with those populations. Data collection and timeline. I started this in May 2015, and I concluded in March 2018. Of course, I worked with the members of Burundi Peacebuilding and Non-Violence Network, along with some governmental leaders such as governor or the sociocultural counselors. And while members of the network participate in both interviews and pre and post survey, I only interviewed governors. When I was not able to have governors, I interviewed the sociocultural counselor. Why did I select a social counselor? Because they are the one who deal with everyday conflict when they erupt in each province. They were very well suited to answer to my questions. And the other reason was because it is really hard to find the governors. And when I spent 2 days or 3 days in each province without finding a governor, I had to look for the socio-cultural council. I already said that I used pre and post survey, but also I had semi-structured interviews. Semi-structured interviews play a major role in the Burundian context because there are people who are speaking. They like to speak instead of writing. And if you ask questions which are open, they will have a chance to say even what you did not ask, as far as it is something which is really in their heart. With this kind of interviews, I was able to grasp more than what I was expecting. In addition to the games, soccer, basket, football that we're organizing, we had also questions and answer sessions. Why? Because we wanted the people to think deep, not only about what they are doing, but about the practices that they see in the neighborhood, but also how they behave. These are pictures of some people either watching games or attending or participating in those Q&A. These were special because not only they were answering questions, but there was questions for each kind of people. You see that picture that I selected, we have somebody who's not educated. He's not educated, and many people may look down on him, but those are the people who would take machetes if something happened. Then we need to involve them and ask them questions that they can understand, which reflect exactly their daily living activities. The survey findings. There are 10 questions that I used for my Likert scale survey, and these are the ones which really showed a shift before we start the activities and after we conclude the activities. I had the same questionnaire, but asked at 2 different times. First before, those are the answers. For example, the possibility of common identity. For the pre-survey, I have 0.38. People were more likely to say that it is impossible to have a common identity in Burundi. But after they got involved in those activities, then they saw something differently. They say, actually, there is a common identity in Burundi. It is even possible to create common identity in Burundi. That's why the number shifted from 0.38 to 2.59. The same thing happened for the possibility of group collaboration. Before they say, I don't think I can collaborate with other groups because we don't have anything in common. Also, about the possibility of peaceful ethnic coexistence. Before they say 0.71, no, we cannot have any peaceful ethnic coexistence. But after the activities were conducted, people say that it is possible, and they say it ought to relate to the 2.19. Also, political party collaboration. And interestingly, they moved from grievances, which are sometimes advanced by politicians, saying that we are fighting because we've been discriminated against because of this, that, like talking about grievances, while after these activities, people say it's greed, it's not grievance. People are fighting because they want to get money, to survive, and so forth. And that one, people say that actually conflict can be prevented. There are other questions which did not show clear differences between the pre and the post, and those are like privilege or access to education, healthcare, or jobs, or same privileges for different classes. Those really, they changed, but not that big. The presentation of interview findings. For interviews, I was able to find 5 major micro-themes. These are the existence of ethnic identity, the external factors, and attitude and behavior factors, but also changes and experiences. Each of these macro themes was divided into categories, and from those categories, I had themes. For example, the first macro theme, which is the existence of ethnic identity, I have 3 categories. Some people arguing that, yes, ethnic identity exists and they are real. And I have another category of people saying we have no ethnic identity in Burundi at all. And other people say, actually, we are not sure if we do or if we don't. For example, for the first one, we have themes such as identity at birth. I was born Hutu or I was born Tutsi, and that cannot change. That was one of the arguments. The second, ethnic divisions. You say, yes, they exist because we see divisions and we see people who were killed in 1993 because they were Hutu or because they were Tutsi. But for people saying that there may be no ethnic identity in Burundi, they say this was created by colonialism. And they go back to explain that there is no clear difference, no clear boundaries. They say Hutu and Tutsi speak the same language. They speak Kirundi, all of them, but also they have the same facial features. Meaning, if you are on the street, you won't be able to tell who's Tutsi and who's Twa. And then those people go deeper and give some examples of people changing from one ethnic group to another because there is one advantage or another. This one, participant 9, argues that there are no ethnic conflicts in Burundi because all Burundians speak the same language and they have the same culture. Second macro theme, which is external factor. We have political, economic, and sociocultural. For example, if we take the example of ethnic quota, participant 1 stresses that one's ethnic group can help him or her get a position when ethnic quota are required and when they need someone from his or her ethnic group. If you are a Hutu and then you know that there is a position open for a Hutu, then you are lucky. With ethnic quota, you are going to apply for that position. But this can backfire. If you are a Hutu and the ethnic quota require one more Tutsi, then you would not be able to be hired because you don't qualify, even if you may have like the skills which are needed. The second macro theme is about attitude behavior factors. There are negative attitude, we have behavior and perception. For example, the killings and abuse, which are negative. Participant 14 said that during the Civil War, Tutsi complained that they were being killed by Hutu. Hutu on their side complained that Tutsi were killing them, to the point that Hutu were even named rebels. Next, changes. There are changes in what people do, there are changes in how they think, but also they are changing on how they behave. For example, they stress that education or training can help people change their identity. Participant 2 said that education is very important because when a person is educated, he becomes more open-minded and therefore evaluate each act that he poses. He would not accept to go kill someone when he knows that killing is a bad thing. Another macro theme is about experiences. There are negative experiences and positive experiences, and each one has a role to play in people's perception of one another and also in the identification. There are people who say that there are still ethnic problems, and those who say that we are moving in a positive way, meaning there are some changes that have already happened. For example, in terms of positive, we have new generations saying that, yes, we know this happens. People killed one another because of ethnic group, but they say for our new generation, young people, we should move forward and not go back to those ethnic divisions. And they also mention some slow change of mentality to understand that people share more than what divided them. Also, we can see some example of intermarriage, when Hutu and Tutsi get married. And then it's difficult to go, for example, kill your wife because he's a Hutu or a Tutsi. Those who say that there is still some problem, for example, participant 1 said that people still have ethnic division in their heart. They may not show it, but they may still have some divisions in their heart, and they are not yet to the point of having the same identity. Drawing from all these surveys and interviews, I came up with a new model of Burundian ethnic identity. This model has two paths. I have the short one and the long one. The short one is the one that we are accustomed to see during conflict, during hatred. It starts with number 1. I don't know if you can read it. It's preconceived information or new experiences. When somebody is in a context, he knows things are not working. There are ethnic divisions between people. And more importantly, he goes to the second one when he can see clearly that there are ethnic boundaries and that the politics favors divisions, that democracy is not in place. And therefore, he moves to having negative behavior, negative attitude, and negative perception of the other people. When you are living that community, when you are hated because of who you are, when you are discriminated against, then you have this mentality of acting in that way, even revenge, and continuing possibly the circle of violence. What will happen with the new long way? The life experience has some impact from new strategic programs like the ones that we're using. Those are games, those are charity work, those are community working activities, and those may lead to ethnic identity shift because people have the chances to see the good side of the other. They have chances to interact with others and see that they have the same problems. And from there, they may even change the perception of the world, or perception or the interpretation of all the factors that they see around them. From there, they can develop positive attitude, perceptions, and behavior in contrast to the negative one on the top. And when they develop good and behavior, then there is a change of behavior. They behave better than how they would be behaving if they were in that negative area. And then they have new experiences. And these new experiences help them raise the issue of divisions. Not really to erase, but to reduce the perception of the world. Then they go back to life experiences. I use that to show that we go back to the preconceived, but actually it's not really back there because the environment has shifted. It's a better word than what it was before. Conclusions. I have two pillars. The first one is the constructivist approach to ethnic identity, because if we are not sure that ethnic identity can be constructed, then all the activities that we do will not lead to any shift. But also the fact that there are no rigid boundaries between ethnic groups. There is still possibility of shaping or changing boundaries. This is important because it helps us understand that ethnic identity, and it helps us understand ethnic identity and its functions on people's attitude, behavior, and perception, because who I am has a role to play to what I do. There are strategic programs that can help shift people's ethnic identity, and changes in policies may impact the perception, the attitude, and the behavior of people. There are some practical implications. First, after analyzing all these issues, I found out that there is a possibility of promoting projects which are impacting the economic development and which can include or bring together people from different ethnic groups so that they can collaborate and have the same life. Also, we can strengthen programs that teach patriotism and the love of one another in Burundi. Also, we need to promote peace building and non-violence programs to foster social cohesion, cooperation, and mutual understanding among all ethnic groups. Because when I started with this activity, people had no idea what non-violence means. We had to go back and explain them. Even leaders, governors who were invited to our activities, they had to ask, the first weeks, they had to ask, what should I tell the audience when I come? Because I have no idea what nonviolence means. We also need to create a synergy among government, national and international organizations and communities to promote cohesion and cooperation among all ethnic identities. Also, we need to make democracy and power sharing a priority, because people express that when they are discriminated against, they may act violently. We need also to design a clear strategy to fight ethnic hatred, discrimination, aggression, and violence among Burundians. Finally, we need to take into account the context and interest of a beneficiary population. For example, in our activities, we had different activities conducted in different regions because people expressed the need of a particular activity to be taken into the area. There are limitations. The first one is the timing of the project, which did not allow me to stay there and there to really analyze every aspect of the change. Also, that was due to the funding constraints. It was also challenging to tell if a particular attitude was a simple outcome of the project that was implemented, because it was for 2 years. I don't know if the responses that I got were really the result of the activities that we did, or if there is any impact that was drawn from the previous experiences. There are some challenges to meet, like the number that I was expecting. I could go and spend a week in an area and finally end up by not finding somebody to interview. And also, we need to consider the current situation of Burundi, because I was not able to reach Burundians who live outside of Burundi, who may have a different perception of the current situation. Directions for future research. I think we should advise people to have a larger number of participants in both survey and interview, and also have at least 5 years. I took 5 as just randomly, but if I had 5 years to work on daily basis with the same community, I think I would have more concise and precise outcome and conclusion. Also, the diversification of activities. What we did was related to soccer, basketball, volleyball, and charity work. Maybe people can be innovative and find other kind of activity which can really help move the population to the better direction. And also explore other ways that ethnic identity shifts can take place and how it can be strengthened. And by this point, I would like to thank everybody for listening to me and also for supporting me through all the process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now it's time for the committee to start. Who would like to start? Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much, Vigny. I really enjoyed reading this, and I really appreciate your focus on what activities help to shift ethnic identity towards a more inclusive identity. Wanted to ask you about your model with the attitude, behavior, and perception model that comes out. Yet in your reports from your interview themes, there's a slide where the theme about changes is presented. There's categories of in action, in thinking, and in behaving. And I'm wondering about the difference between action and behaving, because in your model you bring it out to attitude, behavior, and perception. But in your interviews it was action, thinking, behaving. And I'm just wondering how you've got the literature, which has a lot of the perception piece and the attitude, behavior, perception. You've got the interviews telling you this, you've got survey results, you've got your own experience and your participant observation and your action research work. All these different things come together, and I'm intrigued to understand. I'm curious about action, behaving. I wasn't able to understand the difference between those.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a tough question, but I will try. Action for me is the activity that somebody goes out and do. The first situation, somebody decide to go in a community and meet people from a different ethnic group and bring them to participate to our activity. That is an action. But in terms of thinking, it's in the mind of somebody. When people, because we kept talking about like what they have in their heart, that's what I refer to. Somebody was saying, there may still be some issues because we don't know really if there are no more people having hatred, ethnic hatred in their heart. It doesn't really mean that somebody having like ethnic hatred in the heart will go out and act in the same way. But behaving, I connect this to perception. Yes.
So another way, I also had like this discussion with Vigny about this particular. So if you speak about action, it's more connected with positioning within community, on the level of community, and how a person behave within the community and what he's doing as a community member. while in thinking, yes, it's both perceptions and emotions, and behaving, what Vigny was thinking about, it's really, and what's coming from the interviews, because people do not think the same way as we behavior, thinking, and emotions.
They haven't read the literature.
Yeah. In behaving is what was their intention to do something.
Intention.
Like personal, something coming. It's behaving and a perception at the same time. So what their heart was telling them to do, but on a personal, very personal level, instead of action in community. So that's why we were going back and forth with this particular table, but it was very important to stay as close to data as possible instead of putting what we already have, perceptions, behaviors. It's not how people think in Burundi.
Yeah, that's why we do research. Thank you.
Thank you.
If they do something on community level, they think it's different than what they do in themselves.
Yeah. May I ask another?
Yeah, of
Yes.
course, all your.
So I'm intrigued with the survey. I know you had 22 of the Burundi Peace and Nonviolence Network respondents.
Yes.
Did you have other respondents to the survey? Or
Yeah.
was it only the BPN and people?
No, BPN people.
Only those?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because they're the only one who participate in our activity. And I want to measure like if there is any shift in terms of like which is related to activities that we're doing.
Yeah.
That's why I did not even introduce the governor. I did not contact the survey with the governors.
And the hundreds, thousands of people that were at the soccer games and participating in the Q&As, there's not feedback from those people on their experience of shift?
I reflect that in my observations because the reflection that they contribute to the research were drawn from the Q&A. Because at everyday activities, all the people who were like attending, we had the chance to discuss and to ask them questions which are really related to the topic, and then we could understand. That's why I keep coming to my observation. My observation is not only what I saw like between members, but also the questions that were raised by people attending.
Thank you.
You're finished? You might as well just...
I have a list if you want.
Please.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Maybe
So
we'll just do it that way, yeah.
what were your interview questions when you did the interviews? What are your interview questions? Do you have a list of your interview questions? Is that?
Yes, I do.
You've added it in there. Very good.
Okay, I had 10 questions. Actually, I added to my dissertation after I got your suggestion.
Great.
The first one is about how people identify themselves. How do you identify yourself and why? Because if I had kept this question, they were going to say, you know, I'm a Hutu. And then what will I do with Hutu? But why? That's where I started really understand. Because I was born from a Hutu father and a Hutu mother, then I am Hutu. Some say, you know, I don't identify myself with any of those ethnic groups because my father is a Hutu and my mother is a Tutsi. And somebody say, no, I don't identify with any because those are creations from colonizers. Remember when they came, they told us that we look like this, we do this, some are clean, others are dirty, and so forth. Those reflections came through this question. The second is about the change in the past 20 years. How did your identity change in the past 20 years? What about other people you know? This was a strategic question because it may be difficult for somebody to tell how he changed. But when you ask him about other people from his community, he may be open to say, you know, they are really, really like accepting me these days. I think they are changing positively or negatively. And then there is another note from this. If someone changed his or her ethnic group to join your group, would you welcome him or her? Why? Because I need to see, yes, we can say that people are changing identity, but what if somebody comes tomorrow and says, you know, I think I'm from this group, I'm comfortable. it's not enough. He has to be, as the theory on ethnic identity say, group acceptance. I had to tell yes or no if he could be accepted in that group. Fourth, how can you identify how can your identity open doors for political opportunities? That's where they came back to the issue of ethnic quota, some people being marginalized because even if you have the skills and then they don't need the person with that your profile, like ethnic profile, then you are not going to be hired. Belonging to which group makes you feel secure? To come back to security. Is there any ethnic group which has more security or not? What do you think is the main cause of conflict in Burundi? Because I say I may be wrong. These things about ethnic group may not be the reason why people are fighting. I say, what do you think we keep killing one another? And then they came up with this greed, other grievances, other, of course, saying ethnic, other saying political manipulation, as it's written in the dissertation. It was really quite amazing to listen to what people were saying about this question. Why is it hard to deal with the Burundian conflict? That question, I think the way I designed it was really not appropriate to having people responding to me. Because they say, is it really hard? Yeah, I say maybe. If I had thought about it, I should have written in an easy way. But I was not thinking that mode until I had already started to do the interviews and there was nothing I could do to change it. The other one, is it possible to create a common identity in Burundi? Why? This also raised the question and say, but we already have one common identity. We are all Burundian, we speak the same language, we have the same culture and so forth. Why do we need another ethnic identity? Finally, what can Hutu, Tutsi do together to ensure sustainable peace in Burundi? It was like a question, but I had some suggestions, but which were not a closed list because they were free to add, talking about power sharing, democracy, meaning free elections, economic resources, better education, ethnic quota in every sector, freedom of choosing ethnic group to belong to. And then I say, you have any other point that you need to discuss, you are free to raise it. That was for the interview. But for the survey questions, we saw it yeah.
So I do have one more.
Yeah, please.
So, and before I go to that, in terms of that question that you found to be a little problematic around why is it hard, that's a great learning. Mm-hmm. And in your future research, as you move forward, I think it is, in some research traditions, certainly the action research tradition, it would be okay to adjust the question, go back to IRB and say, I found I need to adjust this question, here's my new wording. And generally, with an action research project, that would be an acceptable, learning along the way is a good thing. But it's great that you came to that insight. The other question I want to raise for you is around your subjectivity as Vigny Nimuraba, my friend and colleague here, who comes from Burundi and has, as you've written in your dissertation, you have had your own experiences of ethnicity and conflict, et cetera. And you write in your work in the methodology around addressing your unconscious biases, your own experience of trauma, and bringing that awareness into your work. I wanted to ask you to expand on that discussion a bit. Because in action research, we don't expect anyone to be fully objective. And we do want to acknowledge your subjectivity. And yet I think there are ways in which you really addressed that. You've got a team of people working with you who come from different backgrounds. You've got this careful data analysis approach. But I wanted to ask you to address that a bit more.
Yeah, first of all, I think subjectivity is a good thing in one way. Because you develop a research question because you know something about it. Either because you are passionate about it or because something happens. then you are already subjective. But the question comes with how you deal with it so that at least you can generate something which is really substantial. And what I did was to make sure, first of all, I don't do and plan by my own all the research. I have a team of Burundi Peace Building and Non-Violence Network. And that team had structures. Like I showed you like one of the slides when I was some of the leaders, like actually coming from Bujumbura to go in the south to support other team over there. Those people were the one like dressing the code of activities, choosing the questions, deciding how we move forward. Because if I have been the one, for example, I would have used the soccer games. But guess what? I planned to do soccer games, and I arrive in Ngozi, they say, no, we are going to do charity work. Then I realized, okay, I need really to kind of step back and really follow the trend of the group. That's the only way I could deal with it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Susan.
Okay. I'll just ask the questions that I have at once.
Yes.
Okay. Well, Vigny, thank you so much. Excellent presentation and excellent dissertation material as well. So I just want to congratulate you for coming up with such a great, material. Your presentation in general, I mean, your dissertation in general really also brings back great memories for me, given that I have an ongoing work in Rwanda on matters pertaining healing, forgiveness, and reconciliation. So many of the things that you were discussing just resonated, the things that I've been learning from the people in Rwanda as well. And I've learned a lot from your work. Your literature review is very solid, and I mean, at least for me, the way you articulate the nature and dynamics of identity in light of your topic, I think you were really able to, have that kind of integrated approach all throughout. Because sometimes you could have a very good literature review, but it seems to have some kind of a disconnect with what exactly you're trying to, with the content or the subject of your study. But in your case, I'm able to kind of see that, being intertwined all throughout. So my comments, and some of these are clarificatory comments or questions. I'm just curious about the first part of your research question. You stated there, how do people shift their ethnic identity? It's just an intentional, a conscious, kind of phenomenon. But do you also consider the possibility that shifts could happen without the people necessarily being conscious about it? They just learn about it later on, because they say, how do people shift? It seems like there is really that kind of intentionality there. But I think it could also happen, right? I mean, because people just kind of absorb, socioeconomic, political, cultural, phenomena without necessarily they're knowing that it's actually beginning to shift the way they perceive themselves as such, the way they look at the world, the way they look at the other. So it's just my curiosity.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm also curious about the role of reframing in the process of, identity shift. This now has that kind of a conscious or mindfulness component into it. In other words, people begin to look at themselves, look at the other, look at the world around them, the worldviews, through a different lens. I think you discuss about this, but I was just looking for this exact term, and the word like people reframe, So connecting this to my early, my previous or preceding comment, I was wondering if framing the first part of your research question, like how do people's ethnic identity shift, or ethnic identity shift, instead of how do people shift their identity, because I think your actual discussion actually, to me, is really more about how do people's ethnic identity or identities shift, you know, instead of how people really intend to shift their identity. Okay, another comment that I have is a very minor one. And did you face any challenges in the conduct of your interview and research when people knew that you were affiliated with a particular ethnic identity, or was this not a case? You know, because action research, that really implies you are right there in the community, immersed, you know, and you are part and parcel of your study. Okay, and then the Likert scale, and I'm glad that you're able to also integrate this quantitative approach to your study. Do you think you were able to capture the complexity of people's responses? I know I read all the explanation, discussion, and data analysis that you have, but I'm just curious, and I want to hear it firsthand from your mouth, you know, or from you. Do you think you were able to capture the complexity and how multifaceted, multi-layered, you know? And these are things that we cannot really capture in a quantitative, because there's a strong qualitative component into your you know, work as well. And then one more, related to the practical implications. How much of this do you intend to bring to the attention of the government leaders and policymakers or legislative body in Burundi for possible institutionalization of these, you know, implications that you have identified here? Because I think there's no non-government entity that could actually promulgate it without the political will of the government. I'm asking these questions because I see the relevance and the timeliness of your findings and your implications. So I'm just wondering if you're also intending this to be brought to the attention of the government leaders so that they could start becoming more conscious about it, and then start having some conversation about it out there in the open, and hopefully this will be institutionalized, or, you know, this will translate into government initiated programs and perhaps in policies. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And I really appreciate like the comment you made about unconscious shift, because that was one of my challenges, but I couldn't move forward really to understand and debate it. But I remember like putting one sentence saying aware or not of the shift. That's, I just stopped there, but really thank you for like raising that question. For the second is about the affiliation. The affiliation, I did not have any problem of ethnic affiliation. First of all, because if you ask a Burundian who doesn't know me to look at me and tell which ethnic group, I see many Burundians there, I don't think they will be able to tell. And going to ask a question about somebody, Tutsi will say, oh, he's fine, he's a Tutsi. And when I go to Hutu, they'll say, he's fine, he's a Hutu. Maybe that may have helped, I don't know. But the preparation of the interview also made it easier for me to be accessible, to access some of the people and the participants.
And people were open.
Yes.
To talking to you and responding to you.
Yes, they were open. And the Likert scale survey, that's why we do mixed method. Because I was wondering, should I really only use the interview, or should I mention something which is qualitative? And to be honest with you, when I started doing this Likert survey, I was really afraid that this was not going to generate any kind of good material, good data that I could use along with the interviews. And then I did not even, I had to go and ask how do I calculate this. I brought only my papers and asked the chair to tell me exactly the formula to use. And then I did it, I said, actually, these things have changed. Okay, and then I said, okay, this goes the way interviews also were going. But initially, I was really kind of skeptical about the outcome from those data. But it looks like they go along, meaning maybe with future research, we should also consider it. For the practical implication, this has been going on for more than 2 years. And maybe it depends on the leaders. Our leaders in Burundi, they don't read that much. But what can be done is just to take some of the conclusion and to see how to make them fit in particular situations. What we have been doing with the help of Susan in the Peace Building Center here is to identify where there is a gap and be able to reach leaders with a clear message that can really resonate with the actions, what they are doing, so that they can move one step ahead in a positive way. Because if you push too much, then everything can backfire. But if you are really able to have some kind of argument that can be shared with them, I think that can work. The same way this dissertation can be used for. These conclusions, maybe we need to find where they fit and then go with that recommendation, not everything, because I doubt people really will be reading. Yeah.
Could I ask one more follow-up?
Sure.
Okay.
You can ask whatever question.
Not just one more though. So, okay, Vigny, do you think the Burundian government is open to perhaps engaging? I'm sure this is part of the diplomacy that's been going on with Burundi and its neighboring countries, but open in terms of maybe learning more and from what their neighboring Rwanda government. Of course, it's not a perfect thing, but given where Rwanda is at now and what they have gone through and all these economic, cultural, undertakings that towards peace building, towards moving on as a country.
No, I don't think Burundian can accept it to learn, even if it's a good model or if it's something which is good. As far as it involves Rwanda, then everything will backfire. Yeah, but there is another way we can dealing with these ethnic divisions and so forth. They use also ethnic unity and ethnic collaboration for their own objectives. Remember, with ethnic quotas in Burundi, the only political parties who can be agreed are political parties which have all ethnic groups. Each sector which doesn't have 40% Hutu and 60% Tutsi will not be agreed. And this also helps in shaping some kind of, and preventing some kind of the ethnic violence that we may expect in other situations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
And you will have opportunity to ask more questions if you want to. Just few, some of questions which I wanted to ask already were asked, but I want to return for several things. This presentation of the survey findings, and you have the second slide. What didn't change? And we were going with you back and forth, really trying to. I was asking why, what's not changed, why, like this one, why it didn't change, what does it mean, and so on. And what we really see is a group of questions which didn't provide a lot of change. They were questions connected with relative deprivation, perception of relative deprivation. And this is really interesting. I think this is maybe, I want your input on it, that it could be very interesting to explore why these particular games which you propose and why particular question and answers didn't really reduce relative deprivation as they did reduce perception of threat or collective axiology of everything. Why relative deprivation continued to be so persistent? Is it because it's phenomena itself, or it's because games were not really created to shift particular, because what we see about manipulation was really great, very great. People told, yeah, it's agreed, it's not really hate between people. So we reduced hate, but not relative, so like this is a question. And a second question connected what Susan was asking. Again, I really want to tell you, I was honestly extremely touched, very, very touched when I was reading your chapter on personal chapter, extremely touched. And you still are able to bring objectivity, but at the same time, and Susan will probably agree with me, that when you do action research, it's always normative. Right? Because you actually want to change something, you have a goal of changing something, you have a normative prescription how things should be, right? So how you deal with trying to be objective and at the same time have normativity in your research, right? How you actually, but because in research you have to be objective, but in your action research you are normative. So, and exactly, I completely agree that you are never objective, you come in always with your subjectivity into it, but you at least try to represent equally voices of all sides. So how, this is what interests for me. And the last question what I wanted to ask is a question connected with idea of, let me put it like before I ask a question, because there were a lot of research which actually measured changes in identity after events like 9/11 or development of European Union. This was one body of research. Another body of research was actually seeing how particular activities by USAID or something maybe impact identity. But I didn't know, and what we would try to explore with you, and we didn't see a lot of research, at least published research, which actually specifically created the program to target identity and then measure its impact. So based on this experience after doing this unbelievable, very interesting work, what your very specific, because you provide very general, important recommendations, but what your very specific recommendation if you target identity? What do you do, what you do not do?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think you are right. Game did not change relative deprivation that much. One of the ideas that come into my mind is the timeline. To deal with relative deprivation, people really need to understand and to see the cause and to see the changes which are happening. It's not only a matter of perception. Maybe this can be one of the causes. Another one is, if you see most of the things that were changed are things that people had the chance to tackle directly with the Arusha Peace and Reconciliation Agreement. In terms of power sharing, in terms of ethnic quota, in terms of who gets what, those are things that people can really see and observe. Once they are made aware of the existence of this situation, they just see the example here and there. But in terms of other factors, it's really still challenging. For the second one, I really, from my own personal experience, I know how bad ethnic identity can lead people. And I have suffered along other people enough that I need it to take a challenge and show that there are still people who are motivated to do peace-building work, to promote unity. Maybe those people can be example for the others so that they can learn. Because once we know that something is possible, then it's easy to move forward. But if you don't see examples, then it will be hard. And what I would like to do for this specific ethnic identity shift is, first of all, to make sure people are aware of political manipulation. Because most of the ethnic divisions, Yes, we are like blaming colonizers that they brought divisions, but they did not stay. The first president, the second president, the third republic, those people kept like building on those divisions. I think it's time that we really tackle the issue as our own issue, not as somebody's issue. Because the more we continue to blame others without doing anything, then the less our project will be like successful. And I realized that when we were discussing really seriously with everybody about how and what the problem we are facing, they were really interested in having further discussions. And more importantly, I realized that they attended activities and they were committed to continue interacting, even outside of this like environment that we had created. And if we can continue the same way and make sure, of course, as you said, if the government is involved, we can really see major change and positive changes in this. Thank you.
Okay. Do you have any more questions or suggestions as a committee members? So we can take one or two questions from the audience. Anyone have a questions? Suggestions, comments? Yes.
I have a question, but first, thank you, Vigny. It was a wonderful presentation. It's been an honor and pleasure to watch you through this process and hear from you. I was wondering if, to get your sense, you were speaking of constructivism, a constructivist approach, and you may have already covered this, so forgive me if I missed it, but I'm imagining different ways of approaching these ethnic divisions or these ethnic categories, and I'm curious if you have, if you got a sense from your research how different people believe where they are and where they want to be, and maybe where you think people are and where you want them to be. I was thinking of three different kind of ideas of how to think of difference, or to think of where you want to go. Is your hope or are other people's hopes to downplay differences between Hutu and Tutsi? Or is it to erase differences between Hutu and Tutsi? Or is it, as Al mentioned, to reframe, to re-narrate, to reconceptualize what it means to be Hutu, what it means to be Tutsi, to perhaps play up positive, communal, integrative ideas of what it means to be us, and maybe in a small sense, in a Hutu sense, and then us in a larger sense. And I thought about, are there originalist, pre-colonialist conceptions of Hutu and Tutsi that were obviously not exploited by colonialists, colonizers, that can be, that can be rejuvenated and leveraged towards peace across ethnic communities?
Okay, thank you for the great question, Jay. The constructivist approach, I am using it because we have to agree that we can create an identity and we can change identity. But for Tutsi and Hutu, the problem is not being a Hutu. It's what we mean by being a Hutu. For me, seeing a Hutu, what is my perception? Because this comes on also with the treatment that I envision toward the person. That's why I took considerable amount to discuss about the meaning. When you know that the differences can be used constructively and positively, then it doesn't matter if you are Hutu or Tutsi. For example, we have the same ethnic groups in both Burundi and Rwanda. But in Rwanda, it's rigid boundaries. But in Burundi, you can joke. I don't want to joke with people who are from Burundi here, but I know if I ask, are you Hutu and Tutsi? He will say, I'm a Hutu, but we Hutu have messed up, but it's okay. And somebody will say, I'm a Tutsi, but we messed up, it's okay, now it's over. We need to deal with our other lives. Being Hutu doesn't mean anything. I don't want people really to be forced to change ethnic groups because that will not change their heart. I just need people to understand who they are and to see that they have more in common than differences. Thank you.
Thank you. So, yes.
I'm John Claude. I do have a question.
Thank you.
I'm a Burundian. I'm a fellow Burundian too. As we all know, I'm sure you guys are aware of the Burundian population. A huge number is a young population. So when you were doing your research, how did the young people identify themselves, or what was easy for them to identify themselves rather than approaching old people and ask them the same question? And what impact do you think this research is going to have on the young population? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the great question. Before I do this PhD research, I did my master's research, and the main finding from that research was that there is great difference between generations in terms of identification. Older generations were arguing that we need to deal with these ethnic divisions because these people Hutu are bad and Tutsi are good, or Tutsi are good and Hutu are bad. We need to make sure we track and punish those who were involved in the 1972 genocide. We need to make sure we punish those who were involved in 1988, 89 Ntega Marangala killings. That's where we can come to start dealing with our traumas. And I go to younger generation, they say, yes, those things happened, but we need to move forward. Don't bring us those differences. Don't bring us those hatred. We are Burundian. We need to have a peaceful Burundi. The same thing happens with this research. There is a point where I mentioned generations. People said, especially younger generation, they say, we know war is bad. We know it's not a Hutu or a Tutsi who's bad, but maybe it was bad leadership, or it was somebody who intentionally wanted to follow and to pursue his own initiatives. Then we need to coexist and live together in harmony. Even now, young generations are really pro-unity, pro-collaboration, pro-cooperation. Thank you. Sure.
I'm sorry, I was late. There is a saying, I don't know if it's a Chinese saying, it says that the best chance to plant a tree was 20 years ago, but the second best chance is now. But you mentioned that our leaders do not like to read that much, and information is power. If leaders don't like to read, probably their offspring won't like it too. So what do you think would be or should be the best approach to get the young people to get the information needed to, do what needs to be done?
Thank you. Education is low key, and it was also advocated by respondents to our research. And interestingly, you raised this question when among the prizes that we're giving in our activities, we had the school materials, like pens, like copybooks, and so forth. Because we knew we had people from young school children who were attending school and who were not able to afford copybooks, who were not able to afford pens and so forth. Even bucket, we distributed some bucket to people who were in boarding schools. All those material help them move forward and get interested in schooling. And I think the questions also that were asked, they were set in different ways. Teachers, educators, on one area, they were asked not only to explain a concept, but also to contextualize it so that younger generation can understand it. Like having this interaction between younger and older generations and giving responsibility to educators to teach those who are there, not only about lessons from class, but patriotism and social cohesion. I think it was a good practice. We need also to make sure we do what we can so that people can be educated. As some of the respondents said, if somebody is educated, he's less likely to accept any bad advice he gets from a particular leader. But if you are not educated, then you are going to accept it blindly. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. So we will ask. So do you? Yeah. Let's ask everyone to leave for a few minutes. And we will ask you to come back and make sure we're not recording, right?